On a morning that was neither particularly bright nor particularly gloomy, you find yourself walking along a soft dirt road that has been flattened by years of footsteps, cartwheels, and the slow patience of time. The sky hangs overhead in a pale shade of grayish blue, the kind of color that can't decide if it wants to be gentle or dull, so it settles somewhere in between. The breeze moves without purpose, brushing past your sleeves, carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of distant fields, damp soil, and wood smoke that has drifted far from a nearby hearth. Nothing about the road calls attention to itself, and perhaps that is why it feels so familiar, even if you're certain you have never walked it before. Far ahead, barely visible through the soft morning haze, you see the outline of a small building. There is nothing grand about it, no towering roof, no bright sign, no lively sound rising from within. It sits quietly, as though it has been waiting for centuries without ever once growing impatient. As you walk closer, the shape sharpens. Timber walls, a thatched roof, and a wooden sign dangling from a beam. The sign sways gently, creaking in a rhythm so slow that it blends into the background of your thoughts. The faded painting on it is so worn by time and weather that it's hard to tell whether it once depicted an animal, an object, or perhaps just a pattern someone thought looked decorative long ago. Whatever it used to represent, it now simply marks the building as what it has always been, a tavern. When you reach the warped wooden door, you place your hand against its rough surface. The wood feels slightly cool and carries the faint texture of dozens of old scratches, the kind that come not from dramatic events, but from years of gentle wear, countless hands pushing it open, and the slow shifting of the building itself. You nudge it forward, and the door responds with the kind of long, drawn-out creak that sounds almost relieved to be moving again. The warm, still air inside slips out around you, carrying with it a mixture of scents that blend into a soft, indistinct cloud. The aroma is neither inviting nor unpleasant, a trace of old ale, the faint sweetness of dried herbs, a lingering hint of the previous night's stew, and the earthy smell of smoke that always hangs in the rafters. It is the scent of a place that has existed for a very long time and has no plans to change. You step inside, and the dim interior slowly shapes itself around your eyes. The tavern isn't crowded. A few wooden tables rest unevenly on the floor, some supported by small stones tucked beneath their legs to keep them from wobbling too much. The beams overhead show signs of age, darkened by years of smoke rising from the hearth. A soft crackling comes from the fireplace at the far wall, where a few logs burn with a steady, unhurried flame. Near the hearth sit two peasants, their clothes worn and patched, their boots coated with dried mud. They hold their wooden cups as though they've been holding them for hours, sipping occasionally, but never in a rush. One stares quietly at the fire, his eyes half closed, while the other traces circles on the table with one fingertip. Their conversation, if they had been having one, seems to have paused long ago. To your right, a lone traveler sits with his cloak draped loosely around him. His hood is pushed back, revealing hair that falls messily across his forehead. He has a bowl of stew in front of him, though it seems he hasn't eaten much. A wooden spoon rests against the rim, and a faint curl of steam still rises from the broth, moving lazily toward the ceiling before fading into the dimness. Behind the counter stands the tavern keeper, a man of indeterminate age whose expression seems permanently set to a mild, calm neutrality. His apron is stained in the faded, muted tones of years' worth of spilled ale and stew. When he notices you, he lifts his chin slightly, not quite a greeting, but an acknowledgement that you have entered and are now part of the slow rhythm of the room. You approach, and he asks if you'd like something to drink. His voice is steady, not unfriendly but not enthusiastic either, as though he speaks not out of excitement but because speaking is simply part of the job. You request ale, and he pulls a wooden tankard from the shelf. The mug has a small crack near its base, patched with a thin strip of wax that has been smoothed down by warm fingers long ago. He fills it with ale from a clay jug, the liquid pouring in a quiet stream that makes a soft sound as it splashes into the cup. When you take your first sip, the taste is exactly what you expect. A little sour, slightly warm, with a hint of bitterness that lingers for a moment before fading into something entirely forgettable. It isn't bad, but it isn't remarkable either. It is simply ale, the kind people drink because it's there and because it's something to do. You choose a table near the middle of the room and sit down. The stool creaks beneath you, not in protest but in recognition of its own age. The table has a few scratches on its surface, some shallow, some deeper, all of them created by moments that were likely as uneventful as this one. Someone has carved a small shape into the wood of fish. Perhaps, but the lines are uneven, as though drawn by someone who had more patience than skill. The tavern is not silent, though the sounds it makes are quiet and gentle. A low murmur of conversation drifts from one corner. The faint clinking of wooden tankards occasionally rises above the rest. The fire crackles softly, shedding a warm orange glow that flickers against the walls. Every so often, a shutter bumps lightly against the side of the building when the breeze stirs outside. A musician sits near the far wall with a lute resting across his lap. His fingers move slowly, plucking a soft, wandering tune that doesn't seem to be going anywhere in particular. The melody drifts through the tavern like a lazy breeze, filling the space without drawing attention to itself. He plays as though he is playing for the tavern itself, rather than the people in it, a quiet offering to the room's slow, patient atmosphere. You sip your ale again, noticing how the warmth of the room settles into your shoulders, loosening the tension that you hadn't realized was there. The tavern has a way of easing you into its rhythm, a rhythm that has been the same for countless evenings and countless mornings. People come, people sit, people drink, and people leave, each action carried out without urgency. And as you sit there, you begin to feel the subtle comfort of the place, the gentle stability of a world where nothing special needs to happen, and nothing ever does. The tavern's quiet rhythm settles around you like a soft blanket, warm and worn from years of use. You lean back slightly on your stool, feeling the rough texture of the wood beneath your fingertips. It is smooth in some places where hands have rested for generations, and uneven in others where time has carved its own quiet signature. The dim glow from the hearth flickers gently across the room, casting slow-moving shadows that sway without urgency along the walls. The door creaks open again, the sound stretching in a long, lazy arc through the tavern. A small gust of cool air drifts in, curling briefly around your ankles before dissolving into the warmer atmosphere. A woman enters her cloak spotted with faint traces of dried mud, her hair tucked haphazardly beneath a simple linen scarf. She doesn't rush. She closes the door behind her, offering a nod to the tavern keeper that is nearly identical in its lack of urgency to the one he gave you. She chooses a seat near a window, wiping a bit of dust from the bench before sitting down. After a moment, she folds her hands on the table and simply waits, as though she has all the time in the world. The tavern keeper eventually approaches her table, not too soon, not too late, but at the exact leisurely pace one might take when every day feels like a gentle echo of the one that came before it. He speaks softly, and she replies with equal softness. Before long, he returns to the counter to fetch a cup of ale for her. She accepts it with a warm, grateful smile, the kind that doesn't brighten the room but adds a small touch of comfort to it. The lute player plucks a new pattern of notes, each one running into the next with the lazy familiarity of someone who has played the same tunes for years. His fingers do not rush or show off. They simply move with the same gentle inevitability as the drifting smoke above the hearth. The melody feels like it has been part of the tavern longer than any of the people in it, as though it belonged to the walls before the first visitor ever stepped inside. You sip your ale again. It tastes slightly different now, not because the ale has changed, but because your senses have begun to sink into the comfortable monotony of the tavern's atmosphere. The warmth of the drink spreads slowly, almost methodically, through your chest. There is no thrill in it, just the steady presence of something familiar. At one of the far tables, the two peasants who had been sitting silently finally begin to speak again. Their voices rise just above a whisper, carrying fragments of a conversation that seems to be about nothing in particular. One comments on the weather, noting that it has been neither too warm nor too cold lately. The other nods thoughtfully, as though this is both new information and something he has known all along. They fall quiet again when a log in the hearth pops softly, releasing a small swirl of sparks that fade before reaching halfway up the chimney. The traveler at the counter shifts in his seat, picking up the wooden spoon he had abandoned earlier. He stirs the stew without much interest, watching as the pale broth ripples gently in the bowl. After a moment, he takes a slow bite, chewing with the unhurried rhythm of someone who knows the stew tastes exactly as it always does. The tavern keeper notices his spoon moving and nods slightly, as though pleased that the stew is fulfilling its modest purpose of simply being eaten. Outside, the faint sounds of distant footsteps pass by the tavern, accompanied by the soft whickering of a horse. The noises drift in through the unmended gaps around the window frame. briefly reminding you that the world beyond this dimly lit room continues to move, even if at a similarly unexciting pace. The thought comes and goes without making much of an impression. After a while, the woman near the window takes a small cloth from her pocket and begins to mend a tear in her sleeve. Her stitches are tiny and precise, each one placed with calm deliberation. She hums under her breath, not a tune you recognize, and not a tune that tries to be memorable. It is simply a soft sound to accompany the quiet work of her hands. Her presence feels like a natural part of the tavern, as though she has always sat there, sewing quietly by the window. You shift slightly on your stool, feeling the worn wood beneath you respond with a faint groan. The legs of the table make a soft scraping sound as you lean forward. None of these noises disturb the tavern's atmosphere. They simply fold into it, becoming part of the room's ongoing tapestry of small, gentle sounds. The tavern keeper wanders to the shelves behind the counter, adjusting a few clay mugs and wiping a thin layer of dust from them with the sleeve of his apron. He does not hurry. His movements are steady and deliberate, as though the dust has been patiently waiting for this exact moment to be brushed away. The mugs clink softly as he sets them back in place, contributing another faint note to the room's quiet symphony. A slight draft drifts through the room again when someone passing outside lifts the edge of the hanging sign. The breeze carries with it the scent of damp hay from the nearby stables. For a moment, it mingles with the smell of the tavern as stew and smoke before being absorbed into the warm, steady air. The shutter knocks lightly against its frame once more, offering a brief accent to the lute's wandering melody. The tavern keeper's dog, a small, sleepy creature with a coat the color of old parchment, slowly emerges from beneath the counter. It stretches, yawns, and shakes the dust from its fur before trotting over to a spot near the hearth. It circles twice, and then settles onto the floor with a heavy sigh, curling into the warm glow of the fire. Its eyes close gradually, but its ears remain perked, flicking occasionally at the faintest of sounds. As the minutes blend together, you become increasingly aware of the gentle steadiness of the tavern. Every person, every object, and every sound seems to exist in a shared agreement that nothing of consequence needs to happen. The air hums softly with the accumulated calm of countless days exactly like this one. Your ale is slowly disappearing from the tankard, but there is no urgency to finish it. The tavern does not demand anything from you, not your attention, not your conversation, not even your thoughts. It simply offers a space where time drifts rather than marshes. A man enters briefly, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He speaks quietly with the tavern keeper, handing him the parcel before stepping back out into the pale daylight. The tavern keeper sets the bundle aside without opening it, as though its contents can wait indefinitely. He wipes his hands on his apron once more, then returns to polishing a wooden cup with a soft, worn piece of linen. You take another sip of ale. The flavor feels even milder now, as though the tavern itself has softened it. The warmth from the hearth reaches you in slow waves, sinking into your bones. The lute's melody drifts into a lower pattern, each note drawn out longer than the last. The peasants murmur again, their voices blending into the quiet ambiance. The dog shifts slightly, paws twitching in its sleep. The tavern remains exactly as it has been, a place suspended gently between moments, content to let time move around it rather than through it. And as you sit there, caught in the quiet comfort of a place where nothing extraordinary ever happens, you begin to understand why some travelers return again and again. It isn't for excitement or adventure. It's for the simple luxury of being somewhere that asks nothing of you, where even the silence feels warm. The fire in the hearth settles into a long glowing sigh, the flames curling softly around the newly placed logs. The room brightens just enough to cast gentle patterns of orange light along the beams overhead. Dust motes drift lazily through the glow, rising and falling like tiny drifting seeds that never quite land. You watch them for a while without really thinking about it, letting your gaze follow their slow, unhurried dance. Your tankard sits comfortably in your hand, the wood warm now from your touch and the room's heat. You bring it to your lips for another sip, though you no longer taste the ale so much as you feel its warmth. The subtle bitterness has become familiar, almost soothing, and the heaviness of the drink adds to the relaxed stillness settling through your limbs. The tavern's door creaks again, though this time the sound is softer, as if the door itself has grown drowsy from so many slow-moving hours. A thin elderly man steps inside, leaning slightly on a wooden walking stick. His cloak hangs loosely from his shoulders, edges frayed, but cleaned with care. He takes a long moment to glance around the room, his eyes passing over the travelers and regulars with a steady, unreadable calm. The tavern keeper acknowledges him with a nod, and the old man makes his way to a seat near the wall where he can rest his back against the timber. He settles into the bench with a drawn-out exhale, tapping the end of his walking stick gently on the floor. The tavern keeper approaches him at an unhurried pace, exchanging a few quiet words before returning to fetch a cup of warm cider. When he places it before the man offers a small nod of gratitude, wrapping his hands around the cup as though savoring the warmth more than the drink itself. The cider's faint smell dry apples and heat blends easily into the tavern's tapestry of aromas. The boy who had left earlier doesn't return, but outside you hear the muffled sound of distant laughter, brief, airy, carried by a passing breeze. It fades quickly, as though it belongs to another part of the village entirely. Inside, the tavern remains unchanged, held together by gentle sounds and subtle movements that never rise above a murmur. The peasants in the corner, having finished their ale, sit quietly for several long minutes before one of them stands. He reaches into his pouch, sets a few coins on the table, and nudges his companion gently. The second man yawns, stretches his arms above his head with a weary grunt, and slowly stands as well. They gather their cloaks, nod to the tavern keeper, and shuffle toward the door. The wooden boards creak under their weight, and as they step outside, the faint smell of cool air drifts into the room again. The shutter rattles once in their wake, then falls back into stillness. The musician's tune shifts once more, though he hardly seems aware of his own playing. His fingers move as though guided by memory more than intention, plucking a pattern that loops gently, repeating itself with subtle variations. The notes ripple softly through the room like ripples in a shallow pond after a single pebble falls in. It is a song without a beginning or an end, perfectly suited to a place where time is allowed to stretch and wander. The traveler who had been eating his stew finally finishes the last few bites. He wipes the bowl with the edge of a piece of bread, eating slowly until the bowl is nearly clean. Then he rests his spoon inside, pushes the bowl to the center of the table, and leans back with a long sigh of contentment. He reaches into his cloak and retrieves a small, worn piece of parchment. Unfolding it carefully, he studies whatever is written on it, though his eyes seem to drift lazily across the words rather than reading with focus. After a few moments, he folds it again, slips it back into his cloak, and resumes warming his hands near the fire. The woman by the window watches a few villagers pass outside. Their shadows stretch across the ground, moving at a slow, steady pace that mirrors the atmosphere inside. One of them carries a bundle of firewood. Another leads a mule laden with small sacks. The woman's expression remains calm, her eyes following their movements until they disappear from her view. Then she returns to her ale, sipping it softly before placing the cup back on the table. The tavern keeper returns to the counter where he picks up the cloth pouch the boy had left earlier. He unties it slowly and peers inside, though he only looks for a moment before tying it again. Whatever it contains, he seems content to leave untouched for now. He places it on a small shelf behind the counter, next to a series of other small bundles and wooden boxes that have likely been delivered throughout the week. It appears he keeps them all safe until their owners return another quiet, dependable task in a place built on subtle routines. You shift again on your stool, adjusting your position to rest one elbow on the table. The wood is smooth beneath your arm, and the grain runs in long, slow lines that seem almost carved by the tavern's rhythm. You run your fingertips over the carved fish shape again, tracing its shallow outline. Its edges are calmer now in your mind, as though you have come to accept it as just another quiet detail in a room full of quiet details. The dog by the hearth lifts its head for a moment, sniffing the air as though considering whether anything in particular needs its attention. After a few seconds, it decides nothing does and lowers its head back down, curling its tail around itself. Its breathing becomes soft and steady, blending seamlessly with the crackling logs. The elderly man finishes his first sip of cider and leans back against the wall, closing his eyes briefly in contentment. His breathing slows, and for a moment he seems to drift into a half-doze. Then he opens his eyes again and gazes into the middle distance, watching the tavern's quiet life unfold without concern or haste. Outside, the faint sound of a cartwheel rolling across uneven ground drifts through the window. The fire pops again, sending a small burst of sparks fluttering upward before fading into the chimney's shadow. The lute player changes chords, letting the new tune drift lazily from his fingers without any attempt to raise the room's energy. The tavern keeper moves around the room now, visiting the tables in an easy, unhurried circuit. He checks on the elderly man, refills a few cups with mild efficiency, and wipes a bit of spilled ale from the edge of one table. His movements create a gentle rhythm, a back-and-forth motion that seems more like a practice meditation than actual work. He doesn't move quickly, yet nothing remains undone for long. At some point, you realize your tankard is nearly empty. The last bit of ale has grown warm, and you swirl it gently, watching the liquid rotate once, twice before coming to rest. You lift the tankard and take a final sip, the flavor settling into a familiar, unsurprising finish. You place the empty mug on the table with a soft thud, and the sound blends in perfectly with the tavern's quiet murmur. A faint draft slips inside when the door opens again, but this time it is not a person who enters, just the wind, nudging the door left ajar for a moment until the tavern keeper crosses the room to close it. The latch settles into place with a soft click, restoring the warm enclosure of the room. The afternoon light outside grows softer, shifting toward the pale golden color that precedes evening. Through the window, you can see the long shadows stretching even farther now, reaching toward the road as though trying to gently nudge the day forward. Yet inside, time feels almost motionless, suspended in the tavern's steady embrace. The woman by the window finishes her ale and adjusts her scarf again before rising. She places a few coins on the table, smooths her skirt, and offers a quiet nod to the tavern keeper. He returns the nod with the same calm acknowledgement, and she steps toward the door. Before she leaves, she takes one last look around the room at the fire, the musician, the old man, the dog, and then slips out into the mellow light. The tavern's interior doesn't change when she leaves. The air remains warm, the quiet unbroken. The lute's melody persists, weaving itself through the room like a gentle thread connecting every breath, every sound. Sitting there, in the midst of this slow-moving world, you feel the weight of stillness settle comfortably around you, the kind that doesn't demand attention but invites you to drift deeper into it. You nod slowly as the tavern keeper's words settle into the air, mixing with the sound of the embers shifting in the hearth. His descriptions of repeated repairs, wood swelling, beams settling, hinges resisting and then yielding blend into the growing stillness around you. There is something almost hypnotic about the idea of a building that grumbles its way through every season yet remains exactly where it always has been, accepting each little patch and adjustment like an old friend being nudged awake. He doesn't ask whether you've been enjoying the ale, nor does he mention moving on to another task. He simply lets the moment rest between you both. You take another sip, and the ale tastes exactly the same as before, neither better nor worse. Its warmth spreads mildly through your chest, the kind of warmth that doesn't demand attention but simply reminds you that you're sitting somewhere safe, somewhere ordinary. After a while, the tavern keeper gives a small hum, not quite a tune, more a gentle acknowledgement that time is continuing its sleepy march forward. He turns and begins wiping a clay jug with a cloth that has clearly been rinsed many times, but still carries faint traces of previous day's work. Each slow movement is deliberate, as though he has performed it enough times to never need to think about it again. You let your gaze drift across the room. The peasants near the hearth are still there. One has shifted slightly, now leaning his elbow on the table, his fingers tracing a slow pattern against the wood. The other continues to look into the fire, blinking occasionally, but with the steady patience of someone who has grown accustomed to watching flames without needing them to dance too brightly. In the far corner, the traveler lifts his spoon again. He brings it to his mouth with the same unhurried pace he had before. The steam rising from the bowl has thinned to almost nothing, leaving behind only the faintest hint of warmth. He seems content with it, though his expression remains neutral, neither pleased nor disappointed. His cloak drapes around him like a heavy shadow, making it difficult to tell where the fabric ends and the stillness of the tavern begins. From the musician's corner, another wandering phrase escapes the lute. The notes drift into the air like dried leaves being carried by a soft breeze, no direction, no intention, no destination. He doesn't glance up from his instrument. He strums with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that no one is judging and no one expects a tune that will rise or fall. He plays because playing fills the space between breaths. You inhale slowly, taking in the subtle sense of the room once more, the wood smoke, the faint bitterness of ale, the underlying musty scent of old wood that has seen countless seasons. All of it blends into a tapestry of smells that feel as though they have been layered over each other for centuries. Eventually, the tavern keeper returns to the counter and sets the cleaned jug down. His footsteps are soft on the wooden boards, each step giving a gentle creak, but never enough to interrupt the overall calm of the space. He glances toward the window, though there is no urgency in his movement. The shutters let in a muted gray light from outside, a light that suggests the sun hasn't moved much since you arrived. A gentle draft slips through the gap beneath the door, carrying with it a breath of cool air. It brushes past your legs and mixes with the warmth of the hearth fire, creating a sensation that is neither hot nor cold, simply present. The tavern keeper lifts a small wooden bowl filled with dried herbs and runs his fingers through them thoughtfully. "These came from the widow who lives near the mill," he says quietly, almost more to himself than to you. "She grows them every year, says they help with stomach troubles. I'm not sure if they do, but they smell pleasant enough." You lean slightly forward, catching the faint earthy scent drifting from the herbs as he stirs them. They smell of faded summers and slow-growing plants, nothing strong, nothing sharp, simply an echo of something once fresh. "She trades them for a bit of stew now and then," the tavern keeper continues. "Good arrangement. Has been for years. Things don't change much around here." His voice carries a softness that seems to match the herb's muted fragrance. He sets the bowl aside and begins stacking a few wooden cups, smoothing their rims with a thumb as if testing for cracks. One cup wobbles slightly, and he steadies it. "This one will need fixing soon," he murmurs, "or replacing. Though I suppose it still holds well enough." He places the cups in a neat line, each one facing the same direction, their edges resting gently against the next. The way he arranges them, slow, deliberate, makes the simple act feel like some small ritual. An unspoken agreement with the tavern itself that things remain orderly, even if nothing remarkable happens. A faint cough rises from the hearth corner, followed by a soft sigh. The peasant who had been tracing the wooden table now rests his head against his hand, his eyes half-lidded. His companion shifts his weight, straightening just enough to stretch an arm before settling back into stillness. The musician pauses for a moment, his fingers hovering above the strings. Then he plucks a single note, letting it linger in the air. It floats upward like a tiny bubble and fades before it ever reaches the rafters. Without hesitation, he resumes the same slow melody, each note blending into the next with a comforting predictability. You take another sip of your ale. The taste hasn't changed, but the familiarity of it now feels almost soothing, as though the tavern is gently settling around you. When the tavern keeper finally speaks again, his voice is soft enough that it nearly blends with the fire's crackling. "Travelers come through sometimes," he says. "Not often, but enough. They usually rest, ask for a drink, stay an hour or so. Most don't say much more than a few words. I imagine they're grateful for the warmth and the quiet. There is no pride in his tone, just simple acknowledgement." He wipes the counter with the cloth again, moving the same way he had earlier. Every gesture seems to carry the weight of familiarity, like someone returning to a task he has done hundreds of times before. You glance once more toward the door, noticing how the draft has slowed. The air feels heavier now, as though the tavern has fully settled into its midday rhythm. The light from the window has softened, the color shifting from pale gray to something closer to muted silver. You breathe in slowly, letting the quiet wrap around you. There is no rush here, no need to think beyond this moment. The tavern sits patiently, a place where time continues but never seems to hurry. And as you remain seated at the table, You realize the stillness has become its own sort of comfort, steady, predictable, and endlessly, beautifully plain. The tavern air settles into a comfortable heaviness, the kind that doesn't oppress or weigh down, but simply wraps itself around you the way a warm blanket drapes over tired shoulders. The fire continues its quiet burning, and the faint glow it casts seems to soften the edges of everything: the tables, the cups, the beans above, even the faces of the few people scattered throughout the room. Your fingers rest loosely on the tankard, feeling the slight coolness of the wood where your hand hasn't warmed it. The tiny patterns in the grain feel familiar now, as though your fingertips have memorized them in these last still moments. You lift the tankard again, and the ale swirls inside with a dull ripple, its surface reflecting a faint, blurred slice of firelight. A slow creak draws your attention as the tavern keeper shifts his weight on the stool behind the counter. He folds his arms across his chest, not tightly, just comfortably, and leans back slightly, letting his gaze drift lazily across the room. Nothing in his expression suggests he expects anything to change, and perhaps that's part of the quiet charm of the place. Here, change doesn't feel like an intruder. It feels like something that prefers to remain outside, waiting for an invitation that never comes. The musician, as if responding to some unheard signal, lets the melody from his lute drift into an even slower rhythm. The notes stretch out like long shadows at dusk, each one lingering just a moment longer before fading into the dimness. His fingers glide across the strings with practiced ease, though he doesn't seem particularly focused on his playing. He looks half lost in thought, as though the music is happening through him rather than by him. One of the peasants near the hearth yawns, not dramatically but softly, the kind of yawn that seems to rise from a place of deep familiarity with the room's languid pace. He rubs his eyes and shifts slightly in his seat, settling his shoulders back against the wall. His companion scratches at a spot on his sleeve absently, then reaches for his cup and takes a slow swallow of ale. The faint clink of the cup returning to the table adds another small note to the tavern's quiet symphony. Outside, the wind brushes against the walls, whispering rather than truly blowing. The shutters rattle once, lightly, before settling back into place. A thin beam of pale light slips through the gap in one of them, illuminating a small patch of floor that looks slightly dustier than the rest. You watch as a single speck floats through the air, glimmering faintly as it drifts down in an unhurried spiral. The tavern keeper finally speaks, though his voice is soft enough that it almost blends with the crackling of the fire. "Yesterday," he says, "a peddler came through. Sold thread, needles, some small trinkets. Said he'd been walking for days." He pauses, glancing toward a point on the wall that holds no particular significance. "Bought a length of twine from him. Not that I needed it, but twine never hurts to have." He shrugs gently, as though the memory is neither important nor unimportant, just something that happened, like clouds drifting past or a leaf falling from a tree. You take another sip of ale, and it tastes slightly different now, not because the drink itself has changed, but because the room's atmosphere has settled deeper into your senses. The mild bitterness has softened, replaced by a gentle warmth that spreads through your chest. Each swallow feels like part of the tavern's rhythm, a slow, steady beat that never rushes. The traveler in the corner tilts his head back and closes his eyes for a moment, breathing in slowly. His cloak shifts slightly with the movement, the fabric rustling just enough to be heard. He opens his eyes again and gazes at the window as though expecting something to appear there. When nothing does, he simply lowers his gaze back to the table, resting his hands loosely on the wooden surface. The tavern keeper taps his fingers on his knee, a soft, rhythmic pattern that's more habit than anything else. After a while, he uncrosses his arms and reaches down to adjust the position of a small wooden crate beneath the counter. It scrapes lightly against the floor, not enough to disturb anyone, but enough to remind you that the tavern is still quietly alive. The musician pauses briefly, letting his hand rest on the strings. Then he plucks a single note, long, resonant, fading almost regretfully into silence. Instead of resuming the same melody, he shifts to a slightly different one, though it remains just as slow and just as wandering. The tune meanders like a lazy stream, bending and drifting without urgency. You lean back a little in your seat, feeling the stool give a small, familiar creak. The gentle sound merges with the rest of the tavern's noise, creating the kind of layered stillness that feels almost meditative. You notice for the first time how uneven the floorboards are. Some rise slightly at the edges. Some sag just a little, revealing the subtle shifts of time beneath the building's weight. A moment passes long or short, you're not entirely sure, and then the tavern keeper stands. He stretches his arms upward, not dramatically, but with the ease of someone loosening stiffness rather than trying to shake off fatigue. His joints give the faintest pop, almost inaudible beneath the hum of the room. When he lowers his hands, he rolls his shoulders once, then steps around the counter. He moves toward a small shelf near the wall and picks up a piece of firewood. It's not a large piece, just enough to keep the flames going at their current pace. He carries it to the hearth, sets it gently atop the glowing embers, and gives it a soft nudge with the poker. The wood settles into place with a low thump, and the fire responds with a tiny flare of orange that quickly returns to its quiet burn. The peasants watch with mild interest, nothing more than the passing attention one gives to something familiar. After the tavern keeper returns to the counter, one of them leans slightly toward the fire, enjoying the brief increase in warmth. The air shifts again, just subtly. The warmth from the fire spreads outward, mixing with the tavern's natural stillness. The room feels even more settled than before, as if everything has found the exact place it was meant to rest in. And you remain there, fully absorbed in the steady, unchanging calm of it all, a growing sense that nothing needs to happen, nothing needs to change, and that the simple act of being here is enough to fill the moment. The tavern around you breathes its slow, contented rhythm, and you breathe with it. It pools in irregular patches across the floorboards, casting long, narrow shapes that creep slowly toward the walls. The tavern's dim interior seems to absorb the light, softening its edges and giving everything a slightly warmer, slightly older tone. You watch them drift without the need for thought, letting their slow dance become part of your own breathing rhythm. Neither speaks, nor do they seem to notice the passage of time. He brings the spoon to his mouth slowly, chewing with the same deliberate calm as before. He pauses, tilts his head toward the window, and watches a bird hop along the windowsill outside. Its movements are precise but slow, and for a moment, it seems as though its pace matches the very heartbeat of the tavern itself. The lute player adjusts the angle of his instrument slightly, then resumes plucking the strings in a meandering melody. The notes spill softly through the room, intertwining with the occasional pop from the fire, the muted scrape of chair legs, and the gentle creak of floorboards under shifting weight. The music is neither bright nor somber. It exists somewhere in the middle, like a quiet companion to the ambient motions of the tavern. The tavern keeper bends down behind the counter to fetch another log for the hearth. He lifts it carefully, setting it atop the embers with a soft thump. The fire responds with a brief flare and a faint hiss, sending up a few sparks that drift lazily into the chimney. The dog, curled near the fire, lifts its head momentarily to sniff the air, then settles back, tail curling closer to its body. A soft knock at the door startles neither the tavern keeper nor the patrons. A young boy stands outside, holding a small bundle wrapped in linen. He glances around for a moment, then steps in cautiously. The tavern keeper nods, and the boy places the bundle on the counter. Without urgency, the tavern keeper opens it and peers inside a few coins, some dried herbs, and a folded scrap of parchment. He nods quietly, slipping the items into a small wooden box beneath the counter. The boy leaves as silently as he entered, the door closing with a muted click that barely disturbs the air. You sip your ale again, feeling the warmth spread in gentle waves. The taste is familiar, neither exciting nor disappointing, just a steady companion to the passing moments. Each swallow seems to blend perfectly with the stillness, with the soft hum of life around you, and with the gentle creaks and sighs of the building itself. The tavern keeper adjusts the mugs on the shelf again, lining them up so that each rim touches the next. One tilts slightly, and he nudges it into place. He glances at the fire, then toward the window, then back to the mugs. Nothing is hurried. Everything is done with deliberate care. The routine is comforting. From the corner, the peasants shift slightly. One leans forward, elbows on knees, watching a small crack in the floorboard near the hearth. He traces it with a finger absent-mindedly, then sits back with a small sigh, content simply to observe. The other peers at the fire, the orange glow dancing faintly across his features. No words are exchanged. The silence itself feels like a kind of conversation. The sunlight outside dims further, brushing the walls with longer shadows. The light catches on the lute's polished wood, highlighting its curves in a fleeting, almost accidental gleam. You look around the room and notice the small details you might have missed earlier, the faint scratches on the table, the tiny knots in the beams overhead, the way the cloth of the tavern keeper's apron folds naturally as he moves. The tavern feels timeless, caught somewhere between minutes and hours, neither rushing nor slowing. The traveler takes another slow sip of water, the bowl of stew now empty but not entirely forgotten. He rests his hands on the table, fingers drumming faintly in an almost imperceptible rhythm. His eyes wander lazily toward the dog near the fire. The dog shifts slightly, tail brushing the floorboards, eyes half closed, and the two share a moment of still recognition, each observing the other without expectation or excitement. The tavern keeper moves back to the counter, picking up a rag and wiping down the same area he had cleaned earlier. The movement is precise but unhurried, deliberate but not deliberate enough to suggest urgency. It is simply a continuation of what has always been done here, a subtle ritual that maintains order without calling attention to itself. Outside, a thin wind rustles the leaves of a nearby tree. The sound is faint, but you notice it as the tavern door creaks ever so slightly, letting in a whisper of the outdoors. The sunlight has shifted now into soft amber, painting long, narrow lines across the floorboards. Shadows stretch and bend slowly, brushing against the legs of tables and chairs, moving like lazy wandering fingers. The peasants stir once more. One shifts his position, crossing one leg over the other, then uncrossing it. The other scratches his chin lightly before leaning back against the wall. The movements are minor, almost imperceptible, yet they add another subtle layer to the tavern's constant, unchanging hum. The musician pauses briefly, letting his hand hover over the lute's strings before resuming the gentle plucking. A single note lingers a fraction longer than the others, blending with the faint hiss of the fire and the occasional groan of the wooden floorboards. It is a note of quiet, unremarkable harmony that seems to say nothing more than "this is how it is," and it is enough. You take another sip of ale, and the warmth once again spreads through you. The taste is familiar. The room is familiar. Each sound, each motion, each pause blends seamlessly into the next, creating a slow, endless cycle of comfort. The tavern keeper finally straightens from behind the counter and glances around the room. His eyes meet yours for a brief moment. No words pass between you. There is no need for them. The shared understanding of quiet, uneventful existence is enough. He shifts slightly, then moves toward the fire to adjust a log, sending another small shower of sparks upward. The dog stretches, shifting its position slightly before resting its head once more on the warm floorboards. Its breathing is steady, calm, and rhythmic, another part of the tavern's ongoing, gentle pulse. And so the room continues. The fire crackles slowly, the lute plucks its wandering melody, the tavern keeper tends to small, necessary tasks, the peasants and travelers sit quietly, and you remain where you are. Time drifts, unhurried. Ale warms your chest. Light shifts slowly through the windows. The tavern breathes. And you breathe with it. The glow touches only a few scattered patches of the worn floorboards, painting them faintly before sliding slowly toward the walls. Dust motes float lazily through these beams, each tiny speck suspended in the quiet, drifting without direction. You watch them without thinking, letting them become part of the rhythm you now feel within yourself. Nothing seems urgent. Nothing demands attention. Everything continues at its leisurely pace. The melody stretches, flowing in gentle, meandering arcs that feel almost suspended. You take another sip of ale, noticing the familiar warmth spreading through your chest. The taste is predictable, slightly bitter, slightly sour, with a gentle aftertaste that leaves no lingering surprise. You let the sensation wash over you, feeling the weight of the drink settle alongside the weight of the room's stillness. He handles them with care, placing each item back onto the shelf after inspecting it. Its tail curls once more around its body, and it rests its head down again. The tavern keeper straightens and picks up a wooden mug, wiping it gently with a rag. Each motion is deliberate, unhurried, part of a cycle that has repeated countless times before and will repeat countless times again. The motions are slow, methodical, and barely audible. The tavern keeper returns to the hearth and nudges a log slightly with a poker. The fire flares faintly and then settles. A few sparks rise and disappear into the chimney. You sip the ale one last time, feeling the familiar comfort of its weight and warmth. The room seems to expand slightly around you, embracing the quiet and filling every space with the same calm that has persisted all day. Each sound, the shifting fire, the soft creak of the floorboards, the distant murmur of leaves outside, is absorbed into the slow, steady rhythm of the tavern. The lute player finally resumes, plucking one final slow wandering tune. It weaves through the room like a soft, invisible thread, connecting the fire, the patrons, the tavern keeper, the dog, and yourself in a shared, unhurried existence. The tavern keeper steps back behind the counter, resting his hands lightly upon it. His eyes sweep over the room, taking in the simple details, the mugs, the bowls, the worn wood, the subtle movements of the patrons. Each element is accounted for, each part of the tavern's life acknowledged, and yet nothing changes. The moment remains unbroken. It slips through the gap beneath the door, brushing your legs, and then retreats just as quietly. Inside, nothing stirs significantly. The tavern continues in its slow, patient rhythm. And you remain seated, the tankard empty now, but your body warm, your mind gently drifting in sync with the space around you. Time moves slowly, softly, unhurriedly, and the tavern, like a living thing, exhales in quiet contentment. The light outside continues to fade, slipping from pale gold into muted amber. Shadows stretch longer, reaching across the floorboards and curling slowly toward the walls. The tavern's interior grows softer as a result, the edges of the tables, beams, and chairs blurring gently in the dimming light. Dust floats through these beams, spinning in slow, lazy arcs that seem to exist solely to mark the passage of time, nothing more. The peasants near the hearth have shifted positions again, though barely. One leans slightly forward, resting his chin on his hand. His companion shifts as well, adjusting his back against the wall, his shoulders rising and falling in the slow rhythm of his breathing. Neither speaks. There is no need. The quiet itself is enough. The traveler in the corner tilts his head back slightly, closing his eyes for a moment. He inhales softly, letting the stillness of the room fill him. His hands rest lightly on the table, fingers tracing the worn grain without intent. When he opens his eyes, they fall again on the fire, following the faint flicker of sparks as they rise and vanish into the chimney. The pattern is repetitive, almost hypnotic, and he seems to watch with the kind of quiet attention that requires no urgency, no expectation. The lute player strums a chord and allows it to linger in the air. One string buzzes faintly, and he does not correct it. He pauses, resting his fingers lightly on the strings before resuming, letting each note meander as though it has nowhere to go. His melody is slow and unhurried, folding seamlessly into the room's natural rhythm, the occasional creak of floorboards, the fire's muted crackle, the whisper of wind through a shutter. The tavern keeper moves slowly behind the counter. He lifts a jug and sets it down, the soft thump barely audible. Then he glances toward the door, noting the subtle change in light. The air outside has grown cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and fading leaves. He does not comment, does not react. He simply acknowledges the subtle shift, then returns to his previous task, wiping the counter with the same careful precision as before. The dog near the fire stretches its legs one at a time, then curls back into its previous position. Its breathing remains slow and steady. Its eyes close briefly, then open slightly, only to drift closed once more. It is a small, almost imperceptible movement, yet it blends seamlessly with the tavern's quiet pulse. The traveler lifts a cup of water to his lips, drinking slowly. He sets it down with care, tracing a finger along the rim of the empty bowl. His eyes wander toward the window, following the soft, fading light as it creeps across the floor. A few leaves brush against the shutter outside, their movement faint and irregular, yet perfectly aligned with the pace of the tavern. The peasants shift again. One taps a finger lightly on the edge of the table. The other moves slightly to rub his arms against his body. The movements are small, almost invisible, yet they create another layer in the ongoing quiet of the room. No one speaks. The sound of their subtle adjustments merges with the fire, the music, and the faint creaks of the wooden boards. The tavern keeper retrieves a small bundle of twine from behind the counter. He handles it gently, inspecting it for frays or knots. Satisfied, he sets it on the shelf and steps back, observing the room with calm, steady eyes. His movements are deliberate but slow, as if time itself has adopted the rhythm of his gestures. The lute player resumes a soft, wandering melody. Each note stretches, lingers, and fades gradually, following the ebb and flow of the fire's glow. He does not rush the song. He does not hurry. He allows the room to fill with sound just enough to remind the air that it is alive, yet not enough to disturb the stillness. You sip your ale again. The warmth spreads gently through your chest. The taste is familiar, comfortable, and unremarkable, a perfect complement to the room's muted atmosphere. You lean back in your seat slightly, the stool creaking softly beneath you, merging with the subtle chorus of the tavern. The fire, the music, the slow breathing of the dog, the faint movements of the patrons, and the careful motions of the tavern keeper. Outside, The wind carries a thin chill, rustling leaves in a pattern too subtle to be noticed unless one listens closely. The tavern door shifts once with a soft creak before settling again. The light fades further, deepening the amber glow into dusky shades that settle across the walls and ceiling. The fire responds, sending a faint flare, then returning to its steady burn. The traveler tilts his head, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. He traces a line with his finger on the tabletop, following a faint scratch worn into the wood. He lets his gaze wander afterward, taking in the fire, the musician, the peasants, the dog, and the tavern keeper. Each one is part of the room's slow, deliberate rhythm, and he seems to accept the quiet, the lack of urgency, and the stillness fully. The peasants adjust once more, then lean back again, each breath slow and measured. One yawns softly, then presses his hands against his thighs and sits upright again. The other rests his head briefly against his hand, eyes half closed. Their presence is calm, neutral, steady. The tavern keeper steps to the counter and picks up a small wooden cup. He examines it closely, then sets it back into line with the others, the rim touching the next in a careful, measured alignment. Each sound the soft thump, the tap of a finger, the scrape of wood blends into the overarching stillness like threads weaving a continuous, unremarkable pattern. The lute player pauses mid-strum, letting the final note drift into the room. The sound hangs, then fades into the air, leaving the quiet to expand, deepening the sense of calm. He rests his hand lightly on the instrument, gazing at a distant point in the room as though observing the flow of time itself. You notice the subtle smell of the room, the smoke from the fire, the faint residue of ale, the dry, earthy scent of old wood. It is consistent and familiar, a layer of presence that reinforces the room's sense of permanence. You inhale slowly, letting it settle over you like a soft, unspoken comfort. Outside, the wind continues its gentle rustle, brushing against the tavern walls and sending a faint tremor through the shutters. The sunlight has almost fully faded, leaving the tavern lit primarily by the fire and the soft, lingering glow of evening. Shadows stretch, merge, and shift slowly, moving across the room with a languid, unhurried grace. The dog breathes steadily, its body rising and falling in a calm rhythm that mirrors the fire's gentle pulses. The peasants sit unmoving for long stretches, the traveler rests quietly, and the lute's melody hums faintly, returning to a soft, wandering tune. The tavern keeper watches it all with quiet patience, adjusting the fire occasionally, stacking mugs or bowls but never rushing. The room's rhythm is deliberate and unbroken. Each motion, each sound, each pause contributes to the slow, steady pulse of the tavern. You sit still, absorbing it all, the warmth, the music, the gentle movements, the soft light fading, the subtle smells, and the endless quiet. The tavern seems to exist both outside of time and entirely within it, its calm unbroken, its presence absolute. And you remain seated, breathing alongside it. The light outside has faded to a muted gray, soft by the early approach of night. A few remaining streaks of amber cling stubbornly to the horizon, brushing the tavern walls with faint, fragile glimmers before disappearing entirely. The shadows inside have grown longer, stretching across floorboards and tables, deepening the already subtle hues of wood, clay, and cloth. Dust drifts lazily through these beams of fading light, twisting and spinning in midair without direction or urgency. You watch the tiny particles move slowly, almost hypnotically, letting the room's rhythm fill your awareness. The peasants near the hearth have shifted again, though their motions are minimal. One tilts his head slightly, tracing a worn pattern in the floor with the tip of his boot. The other leans back and rubs his arms, shoulders rising and falling in sync with the fire's soft crackle. Neither speaks. Their quiet presence feels deliberate yet effortless, as though they are part of the room itself. The traveler in the corner lifts his cup of water once more, drinking slowly. He sets it down with a gentle clink, then rests his hands on the table, fingers lightly drumming the grain in a barely noticeable rhythm. He tilts his head toward the hearth and observes the fire, watching the embers glow and fade in their endless, unhurried cycle. The warmth from the flames creeps slowly across the room, reaching even the farthest corners where the fading light from the window no longer touches. The lute player resumes, plucking a soft, wandering melody that seems to stretch and yawn along with the room itself. One string buzzes faintly, and he makes no correction. He does not hurry, does not pause beyond what feels natural. Each note lingers a fraction longer than the last, then fades gradually, merging with the low hum of the tavern's quiet life. The tavern keeper steps behind the counter and picks up a jug, setting it down again after a careful inspection. He glances toward the door and then the window, noting the absence of light outside, then returns to his work without comment. Each movement is deliberate, steady, and slow. Nothing here is urgent. Everything belongs to the rhythm of the room. The dog stretches once, shifting its head slightly, and then curls back into a small, tight ball near the hearth. Its breathing is steady, unhurried, matching the gentle rise and fall of the fire. Occasionally, its ears flick to a soft noise, a creak, a sigh, the subtle scraping of a chair leg, but it does not move further. Its stillness seems to blend seamlessly with the tavern's atmosphere, reinforcing the sense of calm that permeates the space. You take another slow sip of ale. The warmth spreads gently through your chest and settles in your stomach. The taste is familiar, mild, slightly bitter, entirely consistent. There is no urgency, no surprise, nothing to distract from the quiet, unbroken rhythm of the room. Each swallow becomes part of the slow, deliberate flow of the tavern itself. The peasants adjust again. One tilts his head toward the fire, the other leans forward slightly to tap the edge of his mug. The movements are minor, almost imperceptible, yet they add another subtle layer to the tavern's quiet life. A tavern keeper retrieves a small bundle of firewood from behind the counter. He places it gently atop the glowing embers and nudges it slightly with the poker. The log settles with a low, soft thump. The fire responds with a brief flare and a few sparks, which rise slowly and vanish into the chimney. The warmth radiates steadily, filling the room, touching every corner, every patron, every object. The traveler leans back slightly, folding his hands on the table. He observes the flicker of the fire on the walls, the shadows dancing slowly in response, and the faint glimmer of the fading light through the window. There is a rhythm in these movements, subtle and almost imperceptible, that seems to tie all the tavern's occupants together, human, animal, instrument, fire, and room alike. The lute player resumes plucking, his melody drifting along the soft currents of air. He does not rush, does not pause for emphasis, simply allows the notes to follow the natural ebb of time. The string buzzes faintly now and then, an unremarkable imperfection, which is neither corrected nor emphasized. The sound becomes part of the room, part of the fire, part of the slow rotation of shadows and light. You sip the ale once more, feeling the gentle warmth spread through your body. The taste is unchanging, the sensation familiar. The tankard in your hand rests lightly, its weight almost imperceptible. You lean back in your seat, allowing the quiet of the tavern to settle fully around you. Every subtle sound, the movement of dust in the light, the soft shifting of bodies, the fire's gentle crackle, the muted strum of the lute, is absorbed into a continuous, unbroken rhythm. Outside, the wind brushes softly against the tavern walls. Leaves move faintly, brushing against the shutters. A faint creak accompanies the movement, barely noticeable, blending seamlessly with the ambient chorus inside. The sunlight has fully disappeared, leaving only the fire's warm glow to illuminate the tavern. Shadows lengthen further, stretching across tables, chairs, floorboards, and walls. The peasants shift once again. One stretches slightly before settling back, the other leans against the wall and adjusts the fold of his cloak. Their movements are minimal, their presence calm, and their breathing slow. The tavern exists around them without urgency, and they exist within it. The tavern keeper wipes the counter slowly, moving his hand in measured strokes. He pauses to inspect the mugs lined neatly on the shelf, then returns to the fire to adjust a log again. The flames flare faintly and then settle, sending a gentle warmth throughout the room. Each gesture is deliberate, part of the continuous gentle pulse that defines the tavern's rhythm. The dog breathes steadily, shifting slightly, then curling back into its previous position. Its breathing is slow, measured, in perfect sync with the room. Occasionally, its ears flick toward a small noise, the faint tap of a hand, the soft pluck of a string, but it moves no further. Its stillness feels as though it belongs to the tavern itself. The traveler rests his hands on the table, eyes drifting slowly over the room, observing the subtle play of shadows and the flicker of the fire. He tilts his head slightly, following a beam of fading light as it slides across the floor. His body moves only minimally, but the sense of calm he exudes seems to settle over the room. The lute player plucks a final, soft chord. It lingers in the air, fading imperceptibly. The fire crackles softly, the floorboards creak faintly, the tavern keeper adjusts a mug or two, and the dog exhales in slow contentment. The peasants and the traveler remain quietly observant, their movements nearly imperceptible. You sit, tankard empty, body warm, senses filled with the steady, unhurried pulse of the tavern. Time drifts lazily forward. The light outside is gone, replaced entirely by the fire's soft glow. Shadows stretch and merge. Dust floats without direction, and the room exhales in calm, unbroken rhythm. And you breathe with it,